they feel like they're moving forward on that roadmap.
Building the rocket ship kind of as we fly it.
97% of the startups in our cohort said, yes, D3 is helping me.
Welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the D3 Mission Log, where we try to share out lessons learned in real time as Third Derivative tries to boldly go where no clean tech or climate tech startup accelerator has been before. I'm really pleased today to have another guest joining us from the Third Derivative team. Keenan Johnson joined us last year as one of our first startup success managers. You know, we brought in a bunch of startups who have great ambitions, and we thought it made sense to invest in helping them achieve that success. And Keenan's really cool because he doesn't come from a climate tech background per se, but he does come from a deep hard tech background. So since long before he joined the Third Derivative team, he's been committed to finding ways to help kind of streamline the hard tech commercialization, deployment, and scale process. Keenan, would you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, hi, it's great to meet everyone out there in virtual world. My name is Keenan, and like Bryan said, I come from an engineering background sort of in the hard tech space. So I spent, kind of the bulk of my early career doing really hardcore engineering in some of like the hardest fields imaginable, which was aerospace. So I did a lot of work, with different aerospace organizations, working on rockets. I spent a long time at SpaceX working in their mission control environment, which was super awesome. And I think I wanted to go build technology that was, working on problems here on Earth more and more. And so I tried to pivot my career into sort of impact climate, always with the focus of like, how do we build hard tech? And so I founded a couple of startups working on electric airplanes and submarines and all kinds of hard tech things. And that's sort of become my like niche of expertise, I guess, is like, how do you build these hard tech startups to do, the really impossible things that we think we can do as a society for everyone. So it's great to be here.
Thanks so much for joining us, Keenan. And that's so foundational to Third Derivative, right? This notion that it's going to take more than software for us to affect the sustainable, prosperous, equitable energy transition. And hard tech startups and innovations have long kind of languished and had a hard time enjoying that level of success and even support because of their investment return characteristics. We're really excited to have you on board, not just because of your kind of skill set and thoughtfulness in that area, but also as a fellow former entrepreneur. It's great to have some more entrepreneurial energy here in this this startup that we're running and hoping to scale our impact here pretty rapidly. So Keenan, what I'm hoping we can focus on today, since kind of capitalizing on the fact that you're here with us, is talk a little bit about startup success and maybe some of the things that we're doing for startup success and how we're starting to measure it, recognizing that our cohort, our inaugural startup cohort only began a few months ago. We're learning as we go. We're building the rocket ship kind of as we fly it. But very briefly, how are we thinking about kind of measuring and tracking startup success? And do we have any data so far to tell us how we're doing?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because I think one of the reasons why there hasn't been a focus in hard tech, sort of in the last like 20 or 30 years is because it's actually quite difficult to track it quickly. Like, how are you making progress? Because a lot of these, endeavors won't financially return for many years. So it's kind of hard to tell like, oh, is this business working? Where it's much easier to do that in like a software-based business where you can go out and generate revenue, potentially this month if you really like get to it. And so that's been like one of the things I think we've thought a lot about. And I think ultimately, like our goal would be to measure like, how successfully can our businesses and Third Derivative deploy their technology. That's a pretty long game to measure. So the question becomes like, okay, how can we tell if what we're doing, in these 3 months is working? And it's really hard to map that, I think, to a set of like consistent business metrics, for instance, that make sense for all of our startups, especially given that a lot of our startups are really early or exist in really challenging fields. And so success for some of our startups might mean like signing one pilot agreement this month or this quarter or this year. And that can really make or break a business, but is like not so impressive if you're like trying to get to a graph that goes up, like, in your business analytics dashboard. So I think the philosophy that we've taken is just to try to say like, our startups kind of know what success looks like for them. They know where they need to go. And so the best short-term measure of success is like, do they feel like they're moving forward on that roadmap as quickly as they can? Do they feel like we're being helpful? A lot of people, talk about NPS is kind of Net Promoter Score. For those of you who don't know, is like one standard way to sort of measure that. And so that's what we've started to sort of collect from our startups is like the first guiding point of like, are we headed in the right direction? And I think, our accelerator has been running now for like 3.5, 4 months in our first cohort. And so everyone's had enough time to kind of see what's going on and like actually have a reasonable sense of like, is this being helpful? And so far the results have been awesome from our startups. Like, I think the last time I looked at our success survey that we do, 97% of the startups in our cohort said, yes, D3 is helping me achieve my goals faster than I like would have otherwise, which is great. Like, that's the best kind of metric that we could hope for in the short term, I think.
That's great. So if I can summarize a little bit of what I've heard, success means something very different to this broad, diverse group of startups. So kind of measuring success across them is challenging. As such, and especially on such a short time scale, we're using kind of heuristics, essentially, kind of asking them whether they think we're helping them, we're being valuable and helping them trend towards success. And so far, the results are pretty positive. And it's great to hear you talk about NPS. In a prior role, when I was entrepreneur in residence at Rice University, helping them build out an entrepreneurship program, we had a similar challenge, right? Like, how do we gauge whether what we're doing has any kind of meaning or efficacy in building out the entrepreneurial community? And we also used a heuristic metric like NPS to track on an ongoing basis so that we could see, kind of gauge the reactions to new initiatives that we offered or changes in tech. And it was helpful in the long run, because trying to do some kind of deep analysis or deep surveying of an entire venture ecosystem would have just been really challenging for us. So I'm excited to see how those metrics kind of grow and evolve over time. It also, though, reminds, so it's great to have a really good, performance kind of here out of the gate. My experience as an entrepreneur also reminds me of the oft quoted, or at least often attributed, Henry Ford quote of, if I had listened to my customers, I would have, built a faster horse. And so I wonder as well, just given that the space of kind of hard tech, climate tech, deep tech acceleration is is not terribly mature, like how well people really know what even is possible. So I wonder if we will be able, as we move along, to kind of set the bar even higher, so that maybe what we're doing today, it seems like 97% success to the startups, but maybe measured against what we're doing tomorrow, the startups today would be even more aspirational, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, like, just for me personally, like, I think I probably have higher aspirations for where the startups should and could go than probably a lot of them do. Just because, a lot of them they don't know exactly what the clear roadmap is to go from here to, world scale deployment of their technology or business. That roadmap doesn't exist for most of these businesses, which is, why they haven't been deployed. If it did exist, they would be doing it like right now, and they wouldn't need us as their derivative or the ecosystem that we have created here.
Great that we've got kind of a good shot out of the gate. Great that we aspire to kind of much more, and recognizing that we are ourselves a startup, and the primary kind of role, the primary job of a startup is to learn. We are a learning machine. What are some areas where we feel like we're not providing the value that we're hoping to, or we're not helping startups create success? And is there anything that we can kind of learn from some of those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally learning a ton. I think one area that we've talked about a little bit, Bryan, is that I think when people think about accelerators, they kind of have this idea that like, oh yeah, we're just going to put a bunch of startups together and, maybe get some investors and some corporate partners over here, and we'll just kind of put them all in the same room, be it virtual or real. And, if we kind of just shove enough of these people in here, like some sort of magic will occur and we'll hit a critical mass, and then just the ecosystem will explode and everything will start working. And I think that's probably how it appears to some people, who exist on the outside of the operations of some of these accelerators. But I think, one of the biggest lessons that we've learned as third derivative is like it takes a lot of work actually behind the scenes to take that awesome group of people that you've assembled, which is hard to assemble, but then also get them to work together in like the most effective way and achieve like not only what they all want, kind of talking about our NPS score, but also how can they take it above what they think is possible as like the next step. And that's where the magic really starts to happen, I think, in accelerators.
And so do we have any examples that we can look at of areas where that has worked or maybe has not met the ambitions that we had for it?
Yeah. And I think, we're always working on it. And that's a lot of the work that I do day to day is to try to like, look at relationships that we create. Most of what we do is connect, our startups to awesome mentors or partner organizations who, can serve as mentors or supporters, or like there's a lot of different ways, and try to see like, okay, are these the right connections to be making? But then almost even more importantly than that is like to treat each relationship as an experiment, to say like, oh, okay, like, this seemed good on the outset, but is it still working? Is it actually helping everyone achieve their goals? When do they get stuck? Like, is there a way to unstick that relationship? And yeah, I think we've seen a ton of examples of that. So like one example I think we've been working over the past couple of months is we had an awesome, mentor for a startup who seemed perfect for the startup. They worked in the same industry, in the same country. They have basically, I think, the same vision of success as our startup does. Their approach to their work is not the same as the startup. Our startup is over here trying to craft the new business model that doesn't exist. This mentor has been working sort of in the established framework of that location for a long time. And so it seemed really good on paper. I think, we connected these folks. They had a really good set of first meetings. Everyone was super excited about it. I think we had some clear like things that they could work on together. So that all started off great. And, a few weeks went by, and I think we started to see that in the relationship, it became more and more clear that like, although the sort of high level goals were aligned of these two people, but the startup and the mentor, their actual capacity to do what the other one wanted them to do was pretty limited. And, we're still working on that relationship, but it's not totally clear if that relationship will make sense going forward. I think they both have the right intent, but they have different constraints, which make it really challenging to figure out like, okay, how can we actually like push forward a single initiative that we can both justify to like our bosses, that will make sense and actually move the needle forward for both of us, which has been super interesting to watch play out. And I think, it's still playing out, but it's been, more challenging than we thought in the initial phases. And, like me personally, I've had to be involved quite a bit, just like checking in with both sides of the relationship, because I think one thing that we found is they are not necessarily hearing each other in the same way that they think they are, which I think is probably true of like any relationship, right? It's like, how do you cross-check that what I'm saying to you, Bryan, is actually what you're perceiving? It's like, that's like pretty hard to do. It's like my role as the relationship sort of manager has been really important to try to suss out like, okay, are we making progress? Are we stuck? is this person hearing what the other person is saying exactly, that kind of thing. So it's been really challenging and interesting to see like that, this connection make perfect sense at the beginning. It hasn't exactly played out how we wanted to. And so that's been an example of an experiment, which is, not succeeded so far. And I think we think about third derivative as a giant set of all these experiments of relationships. And ultimately our goal is to figure out like, what's the formula where we can start converting those experiments to like truth more often than not.
I mean, that's absolutely right. Obviously, as a startup, right, we have to have the humility to recognize that our worldview is based on hypotheses today, not on truths, not on facts, but we are trying to experiment rapidly and ambitiously to see what we can convert to truth and then, invest in scaling up. Thanks for sharing that, Keenan. So that experience, your experience there reminds me that, when we first launched Third Derivative, we thought of it in some ways as, a giant network. And if I put my computer science hat on, we call that a giant graph. And you have nodes on a graph and you have paths between nodes. And it doesn't actually matter how valuable all of your nodes are if you can't forge connections between them, right? So the value of what we're doing is really a product of the value of the nodes and the value of the connections. And one takeaway here is that the value of the connections is not just our ability to make those connections, it's actually our ability to target those connections as well and make sure that connecting one node with another has the potential for fruitful relationship. And we're very early in our learning journey in kind of building out the intelligence and the heuristics to be able to do that optimally.
Yeah, and I think our job in a lot of senses is to coach all of the nodes of like how to create those relationships. Like, we're invested in all of our startups and partners sort of for the long haul. Like we hope they stick around there and are successful forever. And so, hopefully we're training them to be better. And so our job can be, more and more hands off for our partners that get really good at this over time. But definitely in the early phases here, it's been pretty hands on, I think, for our staff.
That's right. And as we often say in the lean startup world or in the Steve Blank's kind of customer development oriented world, in the early phases, the work has to be done by the founders, right? It needs to be done by the people who actually perceive what's happening, what's valuable, where there is product market fit kind of on the ground before we try to invest in scaling it up. So I know that can be painful work at times, but I'm really glad that our team is committed to it. Great. Well, Keenan, thank you for coming to join us and sharing your experiences and thoughts about not only where we are today, but where we're headed in future. Time to wrap up our episode with our startup of the week. This week, we're going to feature Nithio Holdings. Nithio is a data-enabled analytics and financial intermediary platform to scale off-grid electrification. Essentially, they're developing a pay-to-go energy service financing in sub-Saharan Africa, which is an area that has been limited and constrained often by the lack of data around creditworthiness, et cetera, in very kind of fragmented and heterogeneous populations, and they're using a data-centric approach to solve that problem. Most crucially, we're giving a big shout out today because they just received a $10 million DFC investment loan to really help them get off the ground and start scaling. So keep an eye on Nithio, hopefully creating massive impact very quickly here. So thank you all for joining us for this episode of the D3 Mission Log podcast and video log. We're excited to have you join us on this learning experience. Hit that like and subscribe button, give us a rating, share us out with others who might be interested, fellow explorers who might be interested in participating with us, and stay tuned because we will be back next week with more learnings and more excitedly, boldly going where no climate tech accelerator has been before.